She posted on Instagram, "My fiancé's so poor he couldn't even buy me a 10-carat ring." She forgot to mention my mom was in the hospital or what I did next. When I proposed to Jenna, I didn't expect applause, but I also didn't expect ridicule from the entire internet. That's not an exaggeration. Her Instagram had more followers than sense, and that one caption turned what should have been one of the happiest days of my life into a global embarrassment. A week before it happened, I was spending my nights at St. Mary's Hospital. My mom was hooked up to machines that hummed in quiet rhythm, tubes running from her arms, her skin pale and fragile. The doctors said her condition was stable but critical. I spent every spare hour with her, juggling work and visiting hours. Jenna knew this. She'd visited once, stayed 20 minutes, complained about the cafeteria coffee, and left early because the smell of antiseptic made her nauseous. I didn't blame her. Hospitals aren't easy places to be, but I thought love meant staying anyway. Back then, I was working overtime at an engineering firm. I was the guy who fixed systems other people broke. Long hours, steady pay, but nothing flashy. Still, I'd been saving for months for an engagement ring. Then Mom's hospital bills arrived. I had to make a choice, a 10-carat diamond or another week of treatment for the only person who'd ever believed in me. So I bought a smaller ring. It wasn't cheap, just modest. A 2-carat piece with a vintage gold band. It had belonged to my grandmother. I thought it carried more meaning than money ever could. When I proposed, Jenna smiled like she'd won something. For a moment, she seemed genuinely moved. She hugged me, whispered that she was so happy, and I let myself believe her. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications stacked like dominoes. Friends texting me screenshots. Colleagues sending "Are you okay?" messages. I didn't understand until I opened Instagram. There it was. A photo of Jenna's hand, ring glinting in perfect lighting. The caption read, "When your fiancé is so poor and greedy, he can't even buy a 10-carat ring," faced with tears of joy. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments. "Girl, you deserve better. He can't even upgrade a diamond? Run while you can." Her friends laughed. Her cousin tagged her boyfriend, saying, "See? This is why I told you not to go cheap." And right there, tagged in the post, was me. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the app, but I didn't comment. I didn't message her. I just turned off my phone and sat there on the edge of my bed, feeling something inside me harden into something unrecognizable. When I finally saw Jenna later that day, she acted normal. She asked if I wanted Thai or sushi for dinner. I nodded, pretending not to know. She smiled, scrolled through her phone while sitting across from me, and laughed once or twice, probably reading the comments about me. That night, I went back to the hospital. My mom was awake, weak but sharp as ever. She noticed the ring on my finger, smiled, and asked if Jenna liked it. I didn't tell her about the post. I said Jenna loved it. Mom nodded, satisfied, and told me something I didn't fully understand until later. She said, "Some people love the shine, not the stone. Watch who you're shining for." For the next few days, I said nothing. I deleted my Instagram. I told my friends it didn't bother me. But every night, the image replayed in my mind. The laughter, the hashtags, the digital echo of her mockery. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a joke gone wrong. Maybe she didn't mean it. Then came the second hit. I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, talking about the proposal. She said she'd been so embarrassed, showing off a ring that looked like something from a thrift store. Her words were sharp enough to slice through whatever was left of my denial. That was the first moment I realized the woman I planned to marry didn't love me. She loved what I could provide. But at that point, I was tired, emotionally, physically, mentally. Between my mom's condition, work pressure, and the engagement fiasco, I didn't have the energy to fight. I just started observing, watching, listening. I noticed little things. She no longer offered to come to the hospital. She stopped asking about my mom's condition altogether. She started going out with her friends more, girls' nights, she said, always dressed in new outfits I hadn't seen before. Meanwhile, I was getting calls from the hospital about billing delays. Payments I thought Jenna had processed on our shared account weren't going through. When I checked, the balance was lower than expected. She'd been using it for online shopping. Still, I said nothing. Because anger wasn't strategy. Anger got you sloppy. What I needed was clarity. I began testing her. I mentioned, casually, that mom's condition might worsen and that I might have to take unpaid leave to be there more often. I watched her reaction carefully. She didn't even look up from her phone. She just said, "You can't afford to stop working right now, not with the wedding coming up." That was the exact moment I stopped being the desperate fiancé trying to hold things together. I decided to let the thread unravel, to see just how deep the selfishness went. The following week, I didn't call her once. I didn't send her good morning messages. I didn't invite her to dinner. I focused on work and my mom. 3 days passed before she texted. It wasn't a check-in. It was to ask if I'd made the deposit for the wedding photographer. When I said I hadn't yet, she replied that it was unfair for her to be planning everything alone. Not a word about my mom, who had just been transferred to intensive care. That weekend, while visiting my mom, I ran into one of Jenna's old classmates at the hospital cafe. She mentioned she'd seen Jenna at a rooftop bar with a guy driving a Porsche, someone named Evan. I didn't react. I just smiled, thanked her for the coffee, and walked back to my mother's room. Later that night, while Mom slept, I sat by the window overlooking the city lights and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Jenna yet. I wasn't going to shout or demand explanations. I was going to prepare. Carefully, quietly. When I left the hospital, I started separating my finances. I moved money into a private account, updated billing information, and began setting boundaries she didn't even know existed. I didn't block her. I didn't accuse her. I simply let her believe nothing had changed. In reality, everything had. By the end of that week, the caption that had once humiliated me had turned into fuel. Every word, every laugh in those comments had become motivation. Because I knew something she didn't. People like Jenna build their world on image. An image can collapse faster than a house of cards when you remove one carefully chosen piece. That was the thought that stayed with me as I lay awake that night. The idea that her own post would be the seed of her downfall. And when it came, it would be public, just like hers. After the Instagram post, the silence between us wasn't peace. It was the sound of something decaying. Jenna thought she had moved past it, that my lack of reaction meant forgiveness. But the quiet wasn't surrender. It was the build-up before the fall. For 2 weeks, I pretended life was normal. We still met for dinner once or twice, exchanged polite texts, smiled for the sake of her social media followers. But every moment around her felt like I was sitting across from a stranger rehearsing for a role she barely cared about. She'd scroll through designer catalogs while I talked about my mother's treatment. Her eyes only lit up when she mentioned something expensive, a new dress, a trip, a party invite. One night, she was sitting in my living room, legs folded on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She casually mentioned that a luxury boutique downtown was hiring a brand consultant, and that her friend Claudia could get her in if she looked the part. Then she laughed and said, "But first, I need someone who can afford to sponsor the wardrobe." I didn't respond. Instead, I watched how her face shifted from charm to irritation when she noticed I wasn't reacting. She asked what was wrong. I told her I was tired from work. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're always tired." When she left that night, I sat in the quiet apartment for a long time, trying to remember the girl I'd fallen for. The one who once cried during thunderstorms because she said lightning made her feel small. Somewhere along the way, that softness had hardened into something cold and demanding. The following week, my mother's condition worsened. The doctor said she needed another procedure, one that wasn't fully covered by insurance. I didn't hesitate. I wired the money, emptied the last of my savings, and promised myself I'd rebuild later. When I told Jenna about it over dinner, she barely paused between bites. She asked if that meant we had to postpone the honeymoon plans. I said probably, and she sighed, as if I'd just ruined her evening. I knew then that she'd already checked out emotionally. She didn't argue, didn't comfort me, didn't even pretend to care. She was calculating. We'd been engaged for 5 months, but I could feel her running cost-benefit equations in her head. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Friday night. I was driving home from the hospital when I saw her car parked outside the Emerson, an upscale bar she'd always said was too expensive for regular nights. I parked a block away and walked past the windows, half expecting I was imagining things. She was inside, sitting at the bar with a man in a tailored blazer, tall, clean-cut, confident. I didn't recognize him, but the way she leaned and told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't meeting a friend. She was interviewing her next upgrade. I stood outside long enough to see him hand her something. A card, maybe a hotel key, before she slipped it into her purse and laughed. When I got home, I didn't confront her. I didn't text. I didn't call. Instead, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I started organizing every financial record we shared. Bank statements, transactions, lease agreements. I discovered things I'd ignored before. Her online shopping sprees, recurring charges from luxury boutiques, restaurant bills I'd never seen in person. She'd been spending my money while planning her exit. I didn't get angry. I got organized. Over the next week, I began moving quietly. I transferred money out of our joint account, updated automatic payments for my mother's bills, and created backups of every financial record. I wanted to be ready when the mask finally slipped. Then, as if the universe was testing my patience, Jenna invited me to a dinner party the following weekend, hosted by her close friends. She said it would be good for appearances, which told me all I needed to know. I went. The dinner was at Ristorante Il Forte, One of those dimly lit places where the food is small and the laughter is loud. I showed up in a suit I'd owned for years, freshly pressed, polished shoes, nothing fancy. Jenna, on the other hand, was a spectacle. Her dress shimmered under the chandelier, her makeup perfect, her laughter sharp enough to slice through the room. I sat beside her, listening to the conversations circle around money, promotions, vacations, cars. At one point, one of her friends joked that Jenna must have settled because she didn't see a 10-carat rock on her finger. Jenna laughed and said, "Well, not everyone can afford real diamonds." I didn't react. I just looked at her, and for the first time, she avoided eye contact. When the waiter brought the main course, she leaned in close and whispered that her friend Evan, the one with the Porsche, might be joining them later. She said it like it was harmless, like it was something to look forward to. That's when I knew I was done pretending. The next day, I went to my mother's hospital room and sat beside her. I told her everything. The post, the spending, the humiliation. She listened quietly, her hand weak in mine, then said something I didn't expect. She said, "You can't change people who think love is currency, but you can teach them what happens when the account closes." That sentence stayed with me. When I left the hospital, I made a plan. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't break things. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I'd dismantle everything she thought she owned, piece by piece, while keeping my composure intact. I started with the shared credit line. I called the bank and revoked her access. Then I moved to the lease. I arranged for an early termination, paid the penalty, and re-signed under my name only. I called the jewelry shop where we'd bought the wedding bands and canceled the custom engraving order. By Thursday, I had systematically erased her from every financial tie we shared. The next day, she called, furious. She said her card wasn't working and asked if I'd forgotten to pay the bill. I told her I'd taken care of it and that we'd talk at the dinner party on Saturday. She said she was glad. She had something special planned. When Saturday came, I dressed calmly, arriving 10 minutes early. Jenna was radiant, surrounded by her friends, ordering champagne before I even sat down. She played her part perfectly, affectionate, smiling, pretending to be proud of me. But the tone was different. It was performance now, the same way a magician smiles before pulling a trick. And she didn't realize I had my own trick ready. As the evening went on, I stayed quiet, listening. The laughter got louder, the jokes sharper. They teased me again about the ring, about how old-fashioned I was. Jenna didn't stop them this time either. She smiled, as if each laugh was applause. Halfway through dessert, I got up, told her I was going to get something from the car. When I walked out into the night air, the chill felt like clarity. I opened the trunk, took out a simple black folder, and stared at it under the streetlight. Inside were copies of every financial record, every payment, every luxury expense, every transfer to her account. Proof that the man she called poor and greedy had been funding her life quietly while she mocked him for it. As I walked back inside, the sound of laughter floated through the door. The same laughter from that Instagram post. The same tone. And I realized something. The only way to silence that kind of noise wasn't with shouting, it was with exposure. When I stepped back into the restaurant, the noise felt sharper than before. Every laugh, every clink of glass cutting through the air like small reminders of how far I'd let this go. Jenna noticed me first. She flashed a smile that looked practiced, the kind of expression meant for an audience, not for a person. I sat down, placed the folder beside my chair, and quietly watched the show. The table buzzed with conversation about real estate, vacations, handbags. One of Jenna's friends, a woman in a glittering red dress, leaned toward her and asked, half jokingly, if she'd ever managed to upgrade that tiny ring yet. The group laughed. Jenna didn't defend me. She twirled her champagne glass, smiled, and said, "Still waiting on that promotion." Laughter. Someone made a toast to finding better things, and another joked that love was just a temporary investment. I sat through it all, calm, almost detached. I had realized something over the past few weeks. People like them fed on reactions. Silence starved them. When the dessert plates were cleared, I reached for the folder and set it gently on the table. The sound of paper sliding against linen drew a few eyes. Jenna frowned. "What's that?" she asked, still half laughing, like it was part of the banter. I didn't answer immediately. I opened the folder and pulled out a few sheets, copies of her credit card statements, loan payments, rent receipts, and the proof of the down payment on her car. I spread them across the table, one by one, the way you'd lay out evidence in a courtroom. The laughter began to fade. I looked at her, calm as ever, and said evenly, "These are the things I paid for. The things you called gifts. The things you told your friends were yours because you deserved better." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the background music seemed quieter. Jenna stared down at the papers, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Her friend Claudia, the one from the boutique, leaned over, scanned one of the pages, and looked up at her. "Wait," she said slowly. "You told us he couldn't even afford rent." I watched as the group's expressions shifted from amusement to unease. One of the guys coughed awkwardly. Another woman tried to change the subject. But Jenna's silence was the loudest thing in the room. I stood up. "You've been telling everyone I'm greedy and poor," I said, my voice still low, steady. "But the truth is, everything you've shown off, every dinner, every outfit, every designer bag, was paid for with money I earned while sitting in a hospital next to my dying mother." The mention of my mom cracked the air like thunder. I hadn't meant to say it. It just came out. Someone gasped. Jenna finally found her voice, muttering something about misunderstandings, but I was already stepping back. "I'm not here to argue," I said, picking up my coat. "I just wanted everyone to know who's really been funding your lifestyle." The manager, sensing the tension, approached cautiously. I nodded at him, left a tip on the table, and walked toward the door. Behind me, the murmurs began. People whispering, questions piling up. As I reached the exit, I heard Claudia say something that made Jenna's face drain of color. "You were still seeing Evan while taking his money?" I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The sound of her chair scraping across the floor told me she was panicking. The show was over. Outside, the air was crisp, almost cleansing. I stood by my car, breathing slowly. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from release. For months, I'd carried anger like a weight on my chest. That night, I dropped it. But my plan wasn't done. The restaurant scene had been only the first act. I got in my car and drove home. On the way, I drafted an email, short, factual, emotionless. I attached screenshots of her Instagram post, the receipts, and a summary of the financial transactions I'd uncovered. Then I addressed it to her parents. I'd met them twice. They were old-fashioned, the kind of people who valued image above all else. Before hitting send, I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. She'd humiliated me publicly, drained me financially, and pretended to care while my mother was fighting for her life. There was no reason to protect her reputation. I pressed send. By the time I reached home, my phone was buzzing. Jenna had called 6 times. Then her mother called. I didn't answer either. At midnight, she showed up at my apartment building. I could see her through the lobby cameras, pacing, talking to the receptionist, tears smearing her makeup. I didn't go down. I let her stay there, realizing maybe for the first time that she couldn't control the story anymore. The next morning, I received a long email from her mother. It started with anger, accusations, defensiveness, disbelief. But halfway through, the tone shifted. She apologized. She said she hadn't known the extent of it, hadn't realized her daughter had been using my money while pretending to be the victim online. She thanked me for taking care of Jenna for as long as I had, and said she'd handle things from here. That same day, I got a call from the landlord. Jenna's name was removed from the lease. She'd moved out. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later, one of her friends, not Claudia, but another, messaged me on Facebook. She sent me screenshots of a group chat between Jenna and her circle. In it, Jenna was blaming me for everything, calling me manipulative, claiming I'd faked financial documents to embarrass her. The same group that had laughed at her jokes before was now turning on her. One message stood out. Claudia had written, "You did this to yourself. Everyone saw those receipts. You've been lying to us for months." After that, Jenna disappeared from social media. Her Instagram went private. Her friends unfollowed her. Her job offer at the boutique mysteriously vanished. I spent the rest of that week at the hospital. Mom's surgery had gone well, and she was recovering. One afternoon, as I sat by her bedside, she looked at me and asked why I seemed lighter. I told her it was over, all of it. She smiled faintly and said, "Good. Now maybe you can start living for yourself again." For the first time in months, I felt that might actually be possible. Still, a small part of me wondered what Jenna would do next. She wasn't the type to accept consequences quietly. I expected messages, maybe even threats. But instead, there was only silence. The kind that felt almost peaceful, until the letter arrived. It came a week later. No return address, just my name in her handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She wrote that she'd lost everything, that her parents had cut her off, that Evan had blocked her after seeing her name trending online. She didn't apologize. Not really. She just wrote one sentence that stuck with me for days. "You didn't have to destroy me. You could have just walked away." But that's the thing, I had walked away. She was the one who couldn't stop digging until the ground collapsed under her. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter. Then I took a deep breath, turned off my phone, and drove to the hospital. Mom was awake, stronger this time. She asked how things were going. I told her I'd finally finished cleaning up a mess I should have walked away from a long time ago. She looked at me with tired eyes, smiled, and said, That's what healing looks like, not waiting for someone else to say sorry. And I knew she was right. But the story wasn't done yet. Because every lie leaves a shadow. And Jenna's, I was about to find out, wasn't quite gone. 2 months passed before I heard her name again. By then, Mom was finally home from the hospital, her health improving a little each day. The oxygen machine had been replaced by houseplants she insisted on taking care of. I was working again, catching up on projects I'd ignored for too long, spending my nights at peace for the first time in years. Then one morning, while scrolling through news updates, I saw something that stopped me mid-sip of coffee. It was a short post on a local gossip page, the kind that thrives on small-town drama and social flameouts. The headline read, "Boutique Scandal, Ex-Employee Accused of Fraudulent Orders." The photo underneath was unmistakable. Jenna, hair pulled back, dark glasses, looking exhausted. The article said she'd been caught using a former employer's corporate account to make unauthorized luxury purchases for personal use. Nothing criminal yet, but enough to get her blacklisted from several retail chains. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. It was more like confirmation that the mask she wore had finally fallen off completely. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it twice before picking up. The voice was soft, familiar, and shaking slightly. It was her mother. She apologized again, but this time her voice was different, tired, almost broken. She said Jenna was living alone now, barely affording rent, working odd jobs. Apparently, her friends had abandoned her, and Evan had moved to Miami. She said she didn't want money, just wanted me to know Jenna had been through enough. I didn't argue. I just said I hoped she found peace, then ended the call. But that night, while lying awake, I realized something strange. I didn't hate Jenna anymore. The anger had burned itself out. What remained was quiet understanding of how fragile everything had been. How much energy I'd wasted trying to fix someone who was never broken, just empty. A week later, as I was cleaning out a drawer, I found the engagement ring. The one she mocked. The one my grandmother had once worn through 30 years of marriage. It still caught the light beautifully, simple and elegant. I thought about selling it, but something in me said no. I placed it in a small velvet box and tucked it away. It wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was a lesson in value. That same week, I received an invitation. Not from Jenna, but from Claudia, the boutique friend. She was hosting a small charity event at the same restaurant where everything had gone down. I almost laughed when I read the location, but curiosity got the better of me. I accepted. When I arrived, the place looked different. Maybe it was the lighting, or maybe it was the fact that I wasn't carrying resentment anymore. People greeted me warmly. Claudia introduced me to a few of her colleagues. She'd moved on from retail into event planning and was doing well. She mentioned Jenna only once, in passing, saying she hoped she'd learned something from the wreckage. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to get some air. As I stepped outside, I saw someone sitting on the bench near the entrance. Hunched, quiet, familiar. Jenna. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner. She wasn't dressed for a party. She was just sitting there, watching people go in and out, invisible to everyone but me. For a moment, I froze. Then she looked up. Our eyes met, and whatever was left of the old bitterness dissolved into silence. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She just said, almost under her breath, "You look better." I thanked her, and that was it. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't rehash the story. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said by life itself. Before leaving, she said she'd seen my mother at the grocery store once and was glad she was doing better. That was the only time her voice sounded sincere. When I went back inside, Claudia asked if everything was okay. I said it was, then helped her clean up after the event. I didn't tell her I'd seen Jenna. Some things didn't need retelling. After that night, I didn't see or hear from her again. Months passed quietly. Work picked up, Mom's health stabilized, and I started volunteering at a local youth tech program. The peace felt earned, not given. But one morning, a small white envelope arrived in the mail. No return address again. Inside was a check for $2,000 and a handwritten note. For your mother's hospital bills. I know it's not much. I just wanted to make it right. There was no signature, but I knew who it was from. The handwriting was careful this time, no longer adorned with the loops and hearts she used to add to her name. It was humble, stripped bare. I never cashed the check. I framed the note instead, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of remorse comes too late to fix anything, but just soon enough to prove someone learned. By the time the next spring arrived, I'd moved into a new apartment. Smaller, quieter, filled with the sound of my mother's laughter when she visited. One evening, while having dinner together, she brought up Jenna again, softly, without judgment. "She ever reach out again?" she asked. I shook my head. "Once. That was enough." Mom nodded. "Some storms clear the air. Others just remind you where to build higher ground." That stuck with me. A year later, I met someone new, Renee, a nurse who had helped care for my mom during her recovery. She was steady, grounded, the kind of person who said little but meant everything. We started slow, cautious, aware of how easily people can hide behind smiles. When I eventually told her about what happened with Jenna, she didn't flinch or pity me. She just said, "Good. You learned the expensive way." And she was right. It had been expensive, not just in money, but in time, emotion, and trust. But it also gave me clarity I never would have had otherwise. Months later, I saw another gossip post, this time about Jenna leaving town. She'd apparently moved to another state, working a regular retail job under her maiden name. No photos, no followers, no online persona. Just gone. I didn't save the article. I just closed the page and went on with my day. Sometimes, revenge doesn't need fireworks or final words. Sometimes it's just living better, quieter, while the people who hurt you are left to hear their own echoes. On the anniversary of my mom's recovery, I went to the park where I'd once planned to propose. The same spot that used to make me ache now just made me grateful. I took the small velvet box from my jacket, opened it, and looked at the ring one last time. Then I buried it in the dirt beneath the old oak tree. It wasn't loss anymore, it was closure. As I stood up, my phone buzzed. A message from Renee: "Dinner's ready. Don't forget dessert this time." I smiled, walking toward the parking lot, feeling the evening breeze brush across my face. The sky was clear, the kind of clear that comes only after a storm has burned itself out completely. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the man who'd been humiliated online. I felt like the man who survived it.